I really do mean a few seconds. I just had time to scratch my ear, take a breath, click the button, and here I am again. Richard Dawkins claimed that Darwin made it possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Oh, those evil atheists. I mean, I used the scary thing a lot earlier. This is the kind of thing I mean. Oh, atheists. Darwin made it possible for them to be intellectually fulfilled. Whereas before only Magic Man did it, accomplish this. Darwin is therefore evil. The arrogant ignorance present in that kind of scare quoting boggles the mind. And I'm really ashamed to share a species with this piece of filth. I really do. Hate the fact that this person is breathing air that could be better used, stinking up the place in a, say, garbage pit. Instead of good oxygen being poisoned by foul stenches and spores of some killer mushroom, it's being poisoned by the carbon dioxide that is expelled to keep this sack of shit alive. And that is a shame. The way that he and many others seem to apply this sentiment is that as long as he can make up stories about how things may have, could have, or perhaps, according to his worldview, should have happened, which are materialistic and make no reference to God whatsoever, he is satisfied. No. That's not how he and many others seem to apply the sentiment that it's possible to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. Here's the sense, the way that he and many others do apply the sentiment. Before Darwin, we didn't know why life was so weird, why there were so many kinds of life, and we've discovered more since Darwin, which without Darwin would only have made it worse. But without Darwin, all we had was a story about a boat and animals on it and 150 days or 200 days floating around with shit getting shoveled out of a tiny little window by 8 people for millions of animals, millions of tons with no food storage anywhere, and predators, carnivores eating none of the animals that were on the boat because they would have gone extinct. Before Darwin, you had a bullshit story that sounded to many people like complete crap. Because, get this, it is complete crap. So it sounds accurately as what it is. That's how it's possible now to be an intellectually fulfilled atheist. You don't believe in God, you don't believe in Magic Man just poofs life out of everywhere, just pulling it out of his ass. You don't believe that stuff. So you're left with, there's life. How do I explain it? Before Darwin, people had some ideas, but it wasn't evidenced properly. There was not enough proof of what he was saying. Darwin showed up, he studied, he came up with his conclusion, he held off on publishing it before, was it Lamarck? Or some other a naturalist. Darwin was a naturalist. Some other person came up to a similar conclusion as his theory, and he learned that they were about to publish, and he just published his first. That's why he's, Charles Darwin, father of evolution, because he beat the other guy to the punch, even though he waited. Darwin shows up, publishes, and now we have not only a good story to counter the stupid boat one, but a story that is proven by evidence. There's no gigantic boat. And penguins and kangaroos being on the same boat doesn't really work. Lions and sheep being on the same boat and somehow not starving to death doesn't really work. Evolution does work. So it is fulfilling because it gives you an explanation for something you had no explanation for. And we like explanations. We like to understand the world around us. Christians don't. They like to think they understand the world around them. But see, even then, they like to think they understand the world around them. Intellectually fulfilling is what evolution is. It gives you an answer, but it's also a good answer. It's not just magic happened and shut up. As will be shown below, by storytelling I mean both the concept of narrative and also employing wild guesses as theory. Right. You're gonna fail, douchebag. There are no wild guesses as theories. A hypothesis may start as a wild guess, but nothing in science is flip a coin. Okay, that one's the correct one. That is not how science works. You would know this if you knew what the fuck words meant, but you don't. Whilst interviewing Richard Dawkins, Jonathan Miller asked him to give a summary of the most persuasive version. The response was, in part, there's got to be a series of advantages all the way in the feather. If you can't think of one, then that's your problem, not natural selection's problem. Natural selection, while I suppose that is a sort of matter of faith on my part, since the theory is so coherent and powerful. That's a very weird quote, but whatever. The feather example here. What use is half a feather? Well, it can keep you warm. Feathers are derived from scales on dinosaurs. You know, the scales dinosaurs had. Feathers are derived from scales. Half a feather can keep you warm. Feathers growing larger might provide some other advantages, and eventually, if you have wings, you might be able to fly a little bit or run away faster or whatever. And just because I don't know what advantages it might give doesn't mean it gave no advantages, and therefore all of science is wrong. The matter of faith here, because it's a quote that it has no real context around it, it's really hard to infer what he meant by this. He explains miracle claims as luck, then applies luck to the origin of life. Chance, luck, coincidence, miracle, events that we commonly call miracles are not supernatural, but are part of a spectrum of more or less improbable natural events. Right. Flip a coin, and it's improbable that it will land on its edge. But if you flip a coin a certain way, and it lands, and it's facing a direction, and it starts to roll, it might stabilize itself and stop on its edge. Miracle! Or rather, improbable natural event. See the difference? A miracle, in other words, if it occurs at all, is a tremendous stroke of luck. Right. If you want to call anything luck, flipping a coin and having it land on the edge counts as luck. You want to call that a miracle? Great. No magic necessary, so why the fuck are you using a bad word for it? It is as though, in our theory of how we came to exist, we are allowed to postulate a certain ration of luck. That's another separate quote. Okay. Sure, maybe. So what? We're allowed to postulate a certain ration of luck. Sure. Okay, yeah, we are. Improbable events do happen. Just because it's improbable doesn't mean it's impossible. Improbable events happening require a kind of luck. If you want to call anything luck, then that would qualify. Therefore, yes, we're allowed to have luck in these theories that hold as possible that improbable events happen. Science is so stupid. While discussing theories of how bats and birds evolve flight, Richard Dawkins employs the following terms. Are you ready for quote mine of the century? ... guess ... might have ... could be ... guess ... perhaps ... perhaps ... The beauty of this theory is ... the evolutionary story. That last one doesn't even make sense. Well, the last two, which I assume are related. Yeah, he does use those terms. Do you know why? Because he's not a Christian and he doesn't pretend he knows every fucking thing in the fucking universe, despite evidence to the contrary. He does know some things. He doesn't know everything for certain. Therefore, he uses words like, I guess. Do you know why? Because we're not arrogant douchebags. The people who make these absolute truth claims are the people who have no evidence. The people who most strongly proclaim to know everything are the ones who most weakly know anything. As to how the bee evolved the dance that it performs and communicates to other bees that food has been found, and in which direction and how far it is, Richard Dawkins employs the terms plausible, suggest, would have, perhaps, plausible, plausibility, plausible, might have, would have, it is not difficult to imagine, probably, plausible, plausible, plausible. Good for him. I guess he... Okay, Professor Dawkins, could you explain to us how the bee evolved the dance? Why, yes. Plausible suggests would have, plausible, perhaps, plausibility, plausible, might have, would have. It is not difficult to imagine, probably plausible, plausible, plausible. And that is how the bee evolved the dance that it makes. Quote mining fucker, go fuck yourself. The thing is, he does use those words. He also uses other words that actually mean things. He does not assert as an absolute fact things he does not know as an absolute fact. That is, again, the domain of religious dumbasses like yourself. He does use words that are uncertain because he doesn't know 100%. But he also uses other words which actually contain an explanation which you skipped over because it would have made you look like a fucking moron. Guess what? It didn't work. You still look like a fucking moron. Mariano, author of this article, and concludes, the story as I have told it may not actually be the right one, but something a bit like it surely did happen. Oh, so he's one of those arrogant scientists who believes he knows everything, and he's here admitting that he doesn't know everything. How arrogant of him. In discussing his computer-generated biomorphs, Richard Dawkins concluded, when we are prevented from making a journey in reality, the imagination is not a bad substitute. See, science is just imagination. It's all fake. For those like me who are not mathematicians, the computer can be a powerful friend to the imagination. Like mathematics, it doesn't only stretch the imagination, it also disciplines and controls it. Yes. Therefore, science is all imagination. Is that really what this douchebag is trying to imply with this quote? I mean, there's nothing objectionable in that. And he doesn't even object to anything. He just states, this is what Dawkins concluded, and moves on to another point. Another quote, in fact. Not even another point, just another quote. Another quote after another quote after another quote. Nothing but quoting in this fucking thing without ever pointing to anything. Never getting to a point. Niles Eldredge and Ian Tattersall wrote, science is storytelling, albeit of a very special kind. And what is that special kind? This article does not contain that, because that might make this article look even dumber than it already is. And you want proof that they just quote something and don't make a point and move on? Next line, Franklin M. Harold, Emeritus Professor of Biochemistry at Colorado State University, wrote, we must concede that there are presently no detailed Darwinian accounts of the evolution of any biochemical system, only a variety of wishful speculations. Except for, instance, the eye. A biochemical system. Is the eye a biochemical system? Maybe not necessarily. How about glands? Well, maybe this dumbass, who is an emeritus professor of biochemistry, didn't know his own fucking field. Or maybe this quote started with, according to these dumbass creationists, we must concede that there are presently no detailed Darwinian accounts of the evolution of any biochemical system, only a variety of wishful speculations, period, next sentence, but these dumbasses would be incorrect. Maybe that's what the full quote is. If this guy really is an emeritus professor of biochemistry, what the fuck is he saying? Biochemistry? What the fuck is that? And again, that's just held up there. See, look at this. Scary, scary. Next line. Glenn Isaac wrote, Glenn, if any of the rest of the scientific community is inclined to snigger at the embarrassment of paleoanthropologists over all this, the identification of theory as narrative, pause and reflect. I bet that the same basic findings would apply to the origin of mammals, or of flowering plants, or of life, or even the Big Bang and the cosmos. Paleoanthropologists, the identification of theory as narrative would cause these basic findings. What? This explains nothing and raises questions. And next sentence, Richard Lewontin does acknowledge that scientists inescapably rely on rhetorical proofs, authority, tradition, for most of what they care about. They depend on theoretical assumptions unprovable by hard science, such as the universe exists, that dramatic and radical notion that the universe exists, and their promises are often absurdly overblown. Only the most simple-minded and philosophically naive scientist, of whom there are many, thinks that science is characterized entirely by hard inference and mathematical proofs based on indisputable data. I'll agree with that. Only naive scientists could believe that. Because accidents have also advanced science. Microwaves, for instance, were discovered by some guy having a chocolate bar in his lab coat pocket and working with a radio transmitter of some kind, and the bar of chocolate melted in his pocket. Then he put up an egg and some other stuff. I think popcorn first. He tested again and it popped the popcorn. And then he put an egg. And he showed his fellow scientists, look, something's going to happen. I've discovered something. And then nothing happened to the egg. And some guy came up and looked in close at the egg to see what was going on. And the egg exploded. That's how microwaves were discovered. So it's not just hard inference and mathematical proofs. Sometimes it's also based on accidents happening. The material that space suits are made out of for astronauts, was also discovered in some measure by an accident. A lot of accidents happen in science, and therefore it's not just hard inference and mathematical proofs. There's also a lot of luck. Therefore all science is wrong. Scary, scary. Monsieur Landau has detected narratives parading as scientific theory. Oh, really, they're parading as scientific theory, these narratives. Has she really detected these? Following are some of her observations. Scientists are generally aware of the influence of theory on observation. Seldom do they recognize, however, that many scientific theories are essentially narratives. They may be unaware of the narrative presuppositions which inform their science. Multiple interpretations and ambiguity are no strangers to readers of evolutionary biology. By comparing the narrative roles played by fossils, scientists may become more explicit about the subjective, and often highly imaginative, ways in which they reconstruct human ancestors. I have kind of detected a pattern here. Whenever a scientist is quoted, their credentials are always listed immediately after, like Franklin M. Harold, the Emeritus Professor of Biochemistry. Whenever someone who doesn't know what the fuck they're talking about is quoted, their name is dropped. Look it up for yourself, you fucking idiots. We're not telling you because it might make us look stupid. Monsieur Landau here is saying that people look at fossils and they come to different conclusions. Well, by analysis, the fossils can be set up in a set lineage. The people who have trouble reconstructing human ancestors are creationists who say, monkey, 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 human, human, and then you ask them 7 years later and they go, monkey, monkey, human, human, human. The one in the middle changed, and they're too stupid to realize that they're contradicting their own position. Metaphors cast powerful spells. Oh, spells. See, hear that? Science is spellbound. Not only in everyday life, but also in science. When Stern and Sussman say that A. afarensis had traveled... Australopithecus. I hope I pronounced that right. I probably didn't. Had traveled well down the road toward full-time bipedality. Not only do they speak in metaphor, they also tell a story. Right. They traveled down the road to full-time bipedality. That's a metaphor. No, it's actually a street in Kansas. You walk down this road, and at the end, you achieve full-time bipedality. Of course it's a fucking metaphor. Paleoanthropologic literature is thick with interpretation, not about what the fossils look like, but also what they mean. Really. Is paleoanthropologic literature thick with interpretation about what fossils look like? If you hold up a fossil, is it really just interpretation of what it looks like? Oh, it looks like a fossil and it has this shape here. What an not interpretation. Here's the fossil yourself, sir. What is your interpretation of this fossil, of what it looks like? Well, it looks like a fossil. Fucking bullshit point. But also what they mean, right. What does this fossil mean? This fossil must mean that strawberries are better than chocolate. The idealized image that scientists project of what they do, that elusive objective search for the truth. Well, Stephen Jay Gould kind of covered this earlier. And see the quote here? The idealized image that scientists project of what they do, that elusive objective search for truth. That's the idealized image. And move on. People always come up to me after my talk and say, you should take a look at our science. I'm sure it's going on there too. And this is from physicists, ecologists, and even biochemists, all kinds of scientists. Good for you. Are you addressing only Christian scientists? Because that kind of points in that direction. Or do you only give your talk to members of creation.com? We can rephrase the question to ask whether there's any way to present an evolutionary or historical account that does not involve storytelling. Rather than avoid them, scientists might use them as they are used in literature as a means of discovery and experimentation. Treating scientific theories as fictions may even be a way of arriving at new theories. In science, too, telling new stories will require skill as well as imagination. Therefore, science is wrong, right? Yes, we tell stories with science. And by we, again, I mean my intellectual superiors. Scientists tell stories with science. The story of how life developed into the way it is what evolution is. But it's not just a made-up bullshit story, like a man walked on water and turned 5 fish into a meal for 10 million fucking douchebags. No, it's not just a made-up story. There is a narrative event. You can say, an organism appeared and subsequent changes in its DNA formed more life forms that were different from the previous ones. You can say that. And that is true. But you can also make it sound a little bit more fucking interesting so that the people you're teaching this to won't fall fucking asleep in your fucking class. And again, just quote. Science journalist Roger Lewin wrote the following in quoting John Durant. Could it be that, like primitive myths, theories of human evolution reinforce the value system of their creators by reflecting historically their image of themselves and society in which they live? This is precisely what we would expect of a scientific myth. Okay? Name a scientific myth. Oh, right. It's a quote fragment. It's a quote mine, perhaps, from some guy who said something that has no relevance to any fucking thing. As with, I think, the second chapter, I have completely forgotten what this chapter is about. And I'm not going to scroll up this time. I'm almost at the end, so I really want to get this over with before I pop a vein in my forehead. Roger Lewin also notes that some of the greats of paleoanthropology in the 1920s and 30s considered themselves to have written scientific analyses of human evolution. They had in fact been telling stories. Scientific stories, to be sure, but stories nevertheless. Therefore, they were made-up stories, right? Or were they perhaps scientific analyses that came across sounding as narratives with characters and a smooth flow from one point to the next with a kind of a poetic feel to it? Oh no, stories mean fictional, right. Paleoanthropology alone amongst all the sciences operates within the fourth dimension, with humanity's self-image invisibly but constantly influencing the profession's ethos. Okay, what is the fourth dimension here that is being referred to? Do you think it's in the article at all? Do you think it's anywhere? Do you think they're ever going to describe or explain what the fourth dimension alluded to here is? Of course not. That would be honest. Clifford Jolly, a British researcher at New York University, and this is Roger Lewin saying this again, proposed a new hypothesis in a new classic paper in 1970 titled simply The Seed Eaters. I've heard that name before, come to think of it. The term classic is used here, as in most fields of science, to mean that the paper is almost certainly wrong in every detail except one, its underlying philosophy. Great. Therefore, science is wrong. right? I keep repeating that, but there's no points being made here, so I guess I kind of have to make it for them, because if I don't make it for them, it might escape you how fucking stupid this is, how pointless it is. The epic nature of much of this writing is evident from the tone of the language once one has been alerted to it. Yes, if you just read a scientific text and you go through it, you may fail to notice the epic, as in a story epic, nature of the writing. It's possible. You might read it and you might miss that other aspect to it that may not be clear if you're just reading it without really noticing. Sure, fine with that. Therefore, science is wrong, right? The final point, and they actually do make a final point here in this chapter, so the atheist's origin myths, evolution, is not really hard science at all, but some observations mixed with imaginative storytelling. It's both, douchebag, and what in any of that? I mean, most of the time I had to mispronounce the word paleoanthropology. Evolution? Where the fuck was the proof that evolution is not really a hard science at all in any of that crap? Because I don't remember seeing anything about how evolution was not a hard science. I remember hearing about how evolution, or evolutionists who talk about evolution, might use the story form, the narrative of stories, to explain the point in some more beautiful way. But that doesn't mean it's not a hard science. Paternity tests. Is that just a story made up? It's imaginative? No, it's a fucking fact. It's fucking hard science. So, on that note, chapter 11 begins. And the only good news here is that the final chapter is chapter 13. So, wish me luck. There's still a... that's like a quarter of the scroll bar left at this point on my screen. It's really disheartening. I should not have looked at that. But yes, next video starting very shortly. 11. Atheism and physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and societal health. At this point, my atheism, which is a very good source of my emotional and mental health, is being worn away by the physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, and societal toxin that is theism. So that's chapter 11 coming up very shortly. See you after the break.